So welcome everyone. Welcome to this very special ITM webinar entitled Getting Ready for a Return to Travel. I hope you're all okay out there. It's of course been a desperately difficult time for us all, but we have reasons to feel upbeat about a recovery this year, and it's important to understand all the ways that business travel programs are going to need to adapt. Now, one thing we know for sure here at ITM is that we want the very best for our members, and we certainly have got that for you today. We've got the best possible speaker lineup. In fact, if we were in person today, I don't even think we get insurance for these gods of business travel to be in the same room. So to get us underway and to tell us where we are and what's ahead of us, I'm delighted to say we're joined by Chris Crowley from Nina and Pinta. Chris, over to you.
Thank you very much, Scott, and thank you for that amazing billing. Gods of business travel, indeed. Our intention today is to focus on a couple of key areas, really, around a little bit what's been happening in the last year or so. We're not going to spend too much time dwelling on that, but we're going to spend some time focusing on what we've learned, what we can see as trends and opportunities, how we see the marketplace moving forward over the next couple of years, and what we think are strong and important focus areas to concentrate on in the next 12 to 18 months, especially. We're very grateful to the ITM for the opportunity to do this. It's really a great testament to the ITM, the continuing strength and engagement with members across the buyer and supply value chain. And to be able to do something like this and to engage with you guys and have this kind of conversation and present our perspective is very valuable. We are by no means the only perspective in the market, and we'll come on to that a little bit later on in the presentation. So it's also a great pleasure to see so many colleagues and peers from different companies and organizations attending today. 2020. I think the bulk of us would quite like to never really discuss 2020 again if we could. It really was the year that so much changed. We in the UK have suffered a very difficult year indeed, and a very difficult start to this year. Almost 50,000 dead in January. We passed a terrible milestone yesterday in the 100,000. Every one of us has been touched by this disease and its impacts. Here in my little street in Wimbledon, 40 houses, some 12 or 14 houses have had redundancies or lost jobs. We know 8, 9, 10 friends who've lost parents or relatives to this in different parts of the world or here in the UK. We see the impacts around us in society all the time. It's really tough and it's hard, and it can feel very, very bleak. And we've spent, I think, as a society and industry, we spend a lot of time focusing on almost mourning some of the things that we've lost in the last 12 months or so. And I think we will deal with some of the consequences of this for a very long time. We will lose more people. Our society will have to learn how to mourn those people, how to come to terms with that. The impacts of 2020 will ripple and ripple for years to come, and we will certainly live with COVID and a version of COVID for several years. However, there have also been enormous signs for hope. We saw the release of groundbreaking vaccines at the end of 2020, many of them now coming out into the world. I think 6 million plus people vaccinated in the UK already. I had the experience 2 weeks ago, which many of you perhaps will have shared, of taking my elderly mother to be vaccinated at Epsom Racecourse. This was one of the most emotional moments of my life, and truly, as she and I sat there, and my mother was a refugee from Eastern Europe at the end of the Second World War as a child, and it reminded her of this great moment of history when we're going to undertake this incredible thing. We're going to vaccinate a global population. It's going to take us some time, but we're going to try to do it, and it's going to be a remarkable achievement when we do it. So there is also this great feeling of hope that there is an opportunity for us to get out of this situation. We also have had some very meaningful areas of hope develop around the world. There's positive change, I think, in North America, other equal positive things going on in different places, some strong positive engagement around the sustainability agenda globally. So there are reasons to be hopeful, but at the same time, we have to also be realistic. And with this in mind, what we've tried to do today is to focus with intent and purpose on some of the things that we see, the factors and impacts, and then try to show you what we see as a relatively reliable timeline for the return of our business, and also some of the things that you can be doing, both as buyers and suppliers in that period, to maximize the potential for your success as the business ramps back up. Let's just focus for a moment on some of the impacts. I won't go through every single one of these points, but because I think many of these are already widely understood. I would say we're actually in the middle of a third wave now, not a second wave. We've seen a seismic impact on our industry, particularly on the parts of our industry that were working in transactional models, the airlines, the TMCs, to a certain extent, the hotel companies and others. Some of the enterprise-based businesses have fared better, but will not fare better if this goes on for too long, of course, but they have managed to be more secure in their models. We've seen fluctuating restrictions, changes in demographics, in rules, in regulation. We've seen corridors opening, closing, all kinds of things happening to try and engage travel again and to get travel going. And while this has been going on, we've also seen these really quite alarming impacts on the supply chain. Significant revenue loss over the last year, perhaps as much as 90% margin depreciation across the year. A huge talent drain. HBR estimates that 75% of the staffing losses have in fact been in the lower generations that we least wish to lose from this area. Huge de-skilling as entire departments or sections of businesses are put on furlough or retrenched or let go or go elsewhere. Of course, the virtual impact, which we'll come on to a little bit later as an opportunity, and the great difficulty in predicting any kind of consistent recovery, or even whether we will have a completely consistent recovery, with many different predictions about what a permanent decline could look like, whether you are in the Bill Gates 50% camp or perhaps more in the 15-20% camp. Still, we think around about a third of business will be impacted for at least the next 5 years, at least, as we go forward. So significant impacts. And I'm not going to spend too much time in mourning for this, because I firmly believe, as do my colleagues and partners at Nina and Pinta and the folks that you're going to hear today on the call, and I think also many peers in the industry, that the time now is to focus forward and think about what we should do next. But it's important to understand what these impacts have been. And for corporate program managers, there's been a lot to think about in the last year. Certainly for your travelers, a lot to think about, especially as in many cases, they're not actually traveling. So a lot of the work that you've been doing has been around a potential return to travel, or the travel for the very few that need to travel. Or if you're in one of those businesses that does have to travel, then for those guys, lots of discussion around what the true end-to-end looks like, around approvals, personal health assessments, quarantines, insurance, liability, a lot of quite difficult to pin down areas to assess. Some excellent work done in the industry by different folks to try and help you to plan and plot some of this work. And for your travel programs, of course, continuing concerns around assurance of supply in your supplier base. We see mergers, consolidations, and changes. The realities of contract management when you don't have business to support the contract. Business continuity across the supply chain in general. Increasing process complexity as you come back or think about coming back to business with vaccines, quarantines, testing, tracing, regulation, etc. And of course, the increased focus from senior executives on what you're doing and why you're doing it. A recent GBTA survey estimated around a 55 to 60% increase in senior executive attention on the function and role of the travel management category in their business. It's going to require a lot of flexibility and agility from you. We'll come on to that topic a bit later as well. The way you communicate on trip, the personalization around the traveler, and your interaction with the supply chain. There's a lot of pressure, there's a lot to think about, and there's a lot to do to get ready for the business return. So when we're making predictions and when we're trying to forecast a timeline or to think how the business might move and what might happen, we also, as consultants, had to be quite cautious in certain areas that we didn't fall prey to perhaps the wrong influences or the wrong topics, and that we took account in the right way of the right dependencies when we're trying to make these predictions. The first and biggest challenge for us was to try and avoid optimism bias. That is to say, the fact that we so much want this to come back, and the fact that we are so much positive people and we think positively about things, that we don't present an over-optimistic perspective on what might happen. And it's very hard to escape optimism bias when you work in such a vibrant and an engaged and interpersonal industry like travel. We have to be very cautious about sentiment-based analysis. Over the last year, when you look at analysis of travel behaviors and trends, what you see a lot is that because there hasn't been much travel, travels was trending at around 18 to 19% of pre-COVID levels at the end of last year internationally, most analysis is based on sentiment. How do you feel about something? What do you feel will happen in the future? What do you think will be the outcome for your program, etc.? Now, sentiment-based analysis is very good at gauging sentiment, but it doesn't necessarily give you a very clear insight of what's going to happen, because it relies on how people feel at the time they answer the question. So we've had to also be very careful about not attributing too much value to sentiment-based analysis, and we would urge you also to be cautious when using that kind of data. We also, and I'm always very taken with this statement in the bottom left here, that everyone's entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts. This was frequently used by Obama, but it actually comes from a Democratic congressman, I think, called Daniel Moynihan. And you have to be very cautious that your desire for something to happen doesn't mean it translates into actual facts. Just because you really want it to happen doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen. And there is no silver bullet in this situation. Vaccines on their own will not fix what we need them to fix. We're going to have to combine a number of different strategies to bring travel back, including testing, including tracing, including different kinds of communication, approval, policy, etc. And we're going to have to do those things in a very intelligent way. So there's no one silver bullet that's going to fix this for us in business travel. And the other thing to remember is that while we will see, of course, some regional and some national business come back, the lifeblood that breeds the health and the strength of our industry is based around international business travel. And in that respect, we are a globally dependent business. We sit in a community of nations that travel between each other, that do business with each other. And for travel to work in a fluid way, for business travel to return with any kind of significance, those dependencies need to re-engage, and travel managers, arrangers need to have confidence that they can re-engage their travelers into those markets in a fluid way. We analyzed very carefully the global travel between the top 35, 36 international airport hubs, which represent, roughly speaking, the top 20 or so markets. And in doing so, we realized that these top hubs represented around and about 94, 95% of international business travel. That means that for international travel to fluidly return, these 20 markets have to be working in a fluid, interconnected way with each other. And we'll talk in a second about what that means. We also need our network capacity to be there for travel to return. This picture, which is, I think, a lot of planes parked in a Nevada desert or something similar, says a lot, doesn't it, about what is currently going on today. The last numbers I saw from IATA in December showed a network capacity of around about 54% of pre-COVID levels on the air side. So even if we wanted the business to return tomorrow, the airline capacity is not necessarily there to make that happen. And it will take time for that capacity to come back online. It will take time for the TMCs to bring staff back, to bring resources back. It will take time for a number of these things to happen. So network capacity is also a big factor in what we're looking at. So remembering all of these dependencies and thinking about our business and the interrelated parts of our business, we felt relatively confident, having looked at the trends of last year and these contingent factors that we've just discussed to start thinking about a stage-based transitional return to travel for the international business travel community. And we've summarized it in this very simple graphic that you see in front of you. We are currently today in a period that we call in COVID. This is not a temporary moment or some kind of intermissio or any other thing like that. This is an actual time that we're in. We're in COVID. During this time, we are mostly seeing only essential travel. There's been a lot of focus on business continuity, in particular in the supply chain, on cash liquidity. A lot of economic uncertainty in the supply chain as well. We're seeing vaccines being approved and released market by market by market. The extraordinary speed of the UK market is not currently matched elsewhere, and there are some politics developing around this, but we're seeing these vaccines come out now. As we transition out of in COVID, we'll go into a transition stage, and I took the liberty of adopting an ITM phrase from one of the previous conferences, the hokey cokey. For those of you who've spent time in one of the more excitable London pubs, you'll be familiar with this song, you know, in, out, and we will have that. We've already had that sensation in recent months, but we'll have that even more in the next few quarters as we slowly emerge in a sort of stop-start way, in and out from the in COVID period into a kind of transition period, which we think will last around and about to the beginning of Q2 2022. During this period, we will have networking consistency. We saw the announcements last week from KLM, from Norwegian. We've seen announcements from hotel companies, some mergers and acquisitions developing. So we will see some network inconsistency there as networks flex to try and be flexible to the changing or vacillating demand and expectation. We will see significant changes in the supply chain in the next year and a half. We will see some more mergers. We will see more consolidations. We will see some businesses, unfortunately, unable to continue. And this, I think, will happen with some strength in the second and third quarters of 2021. During this time, we will continue to see the vaccine being deployed across key markets, and we will see a growing number of people vaccinated. Now, at what point do these vaccinations become significant and key enough that they can influence the travel position? Let's remember our 20 key markets that influence so much of global business travel together. And remembering those markets, let's remember what the WHO considers to be some kind of vaccine-based herd immunity, which is around 70 or 75%. We therefore need, in order to have those markets fluidly engaged with each other, vaccine deployment to 70 to 75% in those 20 key markets in order for us to have a chance of re-engaging in a fluid way as a global business travel community. Now, that's quite a statement to make, but that's also a strong ambition and timeline to respect. Now, within those 20 markets, we have some that will move quicker and some that will not move so quickly. Perhaps the most concerning is the US, of course. Unusually, in something that has impacted us so strongly, the US has been at the end of the impact chain rather than at the beginning. Nearly everything that we can think of in the last 25, 30 years, the US has been impacted first or felt it first or deployed something first. This is, interestingly, one of the times that the US is at the end of the impact chain. So, and since the US is responsible for 1 in 2 global business travel decisions still today, it's very important that the US is coming along with the other key markets to bring that fluidity back. Now, during this time, we've all got an opportunity to start deploying solutions, assessing our programs, making sure that we've eliminated redundancies, matched requirement to supply chain, and accelerate those innovations to be ready for the return. And we predict some kind of post-COVID future state earliest at the middle of Q4 2022, but more likely, we think, Q2 2023. And for us, a post-COVID state would represent something in the order of 75% return to the pre-COVID 2019 levels by the end of Q2 2023. Now, that may seem not as optimistic a prediction as you might like to hear, but we think it is relatively reliable. And I think what will be interesting about it is that it will also and you'll hear this from some of our panelists later, that we will see some of this business come back very fast. So we may see a movement from 40% return to 60% return that will be very quick, because there is a backlog of business there that needs to come through. But some of the return, especially the return that's related to large conventions, trade shows, exhibitions, these kinds of things, may take a little bit longer. And during this post-COVID period, we will now have widespread vaccine deployment. We will start to see, or we will see at that point, widely accepted protocols. Now, what do we mean by that? Accepted protocols around required testing for travel, accepted protocols around required cleanliness in hotels and long stay accommodation. We'll see a lot more vendor consistency as well. There'll be less merging and consolidation. Things will have settled down a lot after what would be quite dramatic moments in 2021. So this here, I hope, gives you our perspective a little bit on how we see the return. So what do we want to do now for the next 20 minutes or so in our focus before we get into a discussion? What I'd like to do now is really focus on the opportunities that we should be taking during transition to be ready for that post-COVID return. And this is a forward-thinking way of looking at it. And I've tried to show you this in a number of different ways. So here is a graphic that we use a lot with our customers when we talk about activity linked to timelines. We've talked about short-term imperatives of contingency, the rush to ensure cash liquidity in the supply chain last year, the focus on business continuity from corporate buyers with their key suppliers is transitioning now into more medium-term concerns around commercial models related to the TMCs and the airlines. We'll come on to that a bit later, around how you can ensure long-term assurance of supply, how you can make sure that you're managing exception management within your traveler base. And as we go into transition, we will then start to manage behavioral impacts into the supply chain and corporate programs. We'll start to look more closely at the impacts of modal shifts, virtual and hybrid solutions, intermodality, which is a fascinating topic that I think will be very strong in the next 12 months. Virtual solution impact and hybrid working solutions in general as we deploy those solutions together. And as we come into post-COVID, we will see very strong resurgence of our capacity, a different perspective on the future of work, where we're based, the offices we're in, what that means for travel, what that means for the old-fashioned, commuter trips that people did to their head offices, things like that, and a dramatic increase in focus on sustainability and digital solutions as we move into that post-COVID dynamic. Excuse me. So, over the next year, over the next 12 to 18 months, you need to use your time wisely. Really use this time. The time now is to really focus on the things that you need to do looking ahead. You have got a unique opportunity that you will probably never have again in your business lives, which is that for the next 12, maximum 18 months, you know that your business is going to be quiet. Yes, there will be things going on. Yes, there will be some travel. But in general principle, your networks, your supply chains, your technology solutions will, to a certain extent, be fallow. And for the first time probably in your business lives, you've got a chance to really implement and deploy solutions that will make a difference to how you work. You can accelerate evolution here. You will see from some of the topics that we discuss that there are mostly what we are talking about are things that we already knew we needed to do, which have been accelerated by this situation rather than invented by this situation. And it's really important that we're ready for the return. I love that phrase from the boxing announcer that you often see in the US, that let's get ready to rumble. And we need to get ready to rumble. We need to be ready and ramping up for the return, being ready to re-engage our capacity, our networks, our staff, our solutions. We'll do this by nurturing our community. You've got to be open here. You've got to be inclusive. I'm not too proud to say that I've benefited enormously in the last 12 to 15 months from the knowledge and wisdom of my peers and from other companies across the industry. In particular, I have to say a lot from McKinsey, from Oliver Wyman, from Deloitte, There's a company in the US called MLT Sloan that I read a lot, but also from peers within the industry, Scott Gillespie, Paul and Caroline at Festive Road, Dave and Clive at the BTA, Mark and Dave at GBTA, the whole TAMS community, the Travel Again group. There is so much excellent knowledge and input there, focusing on ways that we can help to bring this back. And you need to be inclusive and engage with these resources during this time. Act with intent. Don't waste your time. If you're planning trips, if you're planning reasons for travel, if you're planning policy, if you're planning solutions and technology, do so with intent. Don't replicate redundant or unnecessary processes that you really don't need to focus on. So specifically, what are we saying here? Well, one of your first focuses, and we hear this from so many of our customers, will be on sustainability. There has been a huge growth in the impact and perspective of brands during the course of the last 12 months. Now, for us, sustainability is not just an environmental project. It is also a topic that relates to the long-term health and development of your business and your brand. It relates to your talent and to your staff. And we also believe very strongly that COVID is a sustainability issue. And I've put here sustainability is a COVID issue because the two things are closely interrelated. We would not have the situation that we have today with COVID if we did not have a global interlocking business community and travel community that we have. It wouldn't have spread in the way it did if it wasn't for that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't travel. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do those things, but these things are connected. And the way that we perceive sustainability and what we do in our programs is very important. So it's also about our brands. It's about how we engage with our own staff. It's about the diversity of our employees. It's about the way that we communicate inclusively across our employee groups in all of our marketplaces. Brand focus is key, and brand focus directly contributes to traveler engagement in your population. If people feel included, if they feel consulted, if they feel engaged, they are more likely to engage with your policies and your processes. It's also about accountability, sustainability. It's about having the data that you need to be accountable. Don't be afraid to put in place cost carbon budgets in your organization. Don't be afraid to hold people accountable to them. Don't be afraid to hold suppliers accountable to that. Engage that conversation in an open way. We need to have open data and accountability for what we're doing. This means better profiles and better budgets assigned to that. And I know one of our panelists today, in particular, Mark Kasher at UBS, feels very strongly and passionately about this. And we need to feel a sense of mission with sustainability, and that mission needs to be translated across our business. Everybody needs to be engaged in the same mission there. People need to be engaged in protecting the environment, in understanding what the social impact of their business is, in understanding their diversity responsibility, in understanding inclusion and seeing a future for talent in their organization. Your second focus should be on digital transformation. You will already have seen this happen in parts of your programs throughout the course of the last year. Massively engage with this and push it forward. This is your chance and your time to put these solutions properly in place. Expand the integration of these solutions across your organization. Implement digital passports. Bring as much content as you can into your world. Don't be afraid of intermodality. Why shouldn't somebody be able to get on a train and be able to order the food that they want at their seat, to have the right scooter or mobility solution available when they get off, to even check on their airline reservation at the same time? Let's really bring that intermodality into our modern environment. Sustainability passports and profiling on a digital level. More fascinating ideas coming out of corporate programs there as well. And expand that interactive communication and feedback. And I didn't mention mobile payment in the previous slide because I specifically focused the slide on it here. It's time for virtual payment and for contactless and mobile wallets in your programs. If you haven't realized this now, or you haven't engaged with it now is the time to do so. This is the way that you can protect your employees, you can protect yourselves from fraud, you can protect yourselves in a number of different ways, and you can implement solutions that specifically assign value and treasury oversight to specific parts of your trip budget, your mobile wallets, or specific destinations or parts of your process. It's gaining traction anyway. If you look at the graphic in the bottom left, you will see that there is a huge take up on mobile payments amongst the young, which will translate its way into your program sooner rather than later. You also need to start thinking about engaging in payment orchestration. This is where you start to sync up the different parts of your process, whether it's payment, whether it's settlement, whether it's reconciliation, so you can start to see a virtuous path between those things. And don't be afraid to implement virtual cards and to insist on suppliers taking virtual cards, and suppliers be more open to virtual payment. It's safer and it's cleaner. Hybrid working practices are, I think, here to stay. We did some analysis for a customer in the UK recently around what might be the potential impact on the season ticket traveller in the UK. And this is an interesting topic. If you assume, as the CBI does, that around 20% of office-based workers may never return to working in an office, we may see a different kind of population emerging now as a working population. This is a working population that doesn't need to live within commuting distance of the office. This is a working population whose travel to the office becomes a business travel expense rather than a personal season ticket loan. This is a population that therefore has a different dynamic around the way it travels rather than necessarily office to office always. It may be more around mutually understandable destinations where meetings can be done or work can be engaged. We're going to see a continuing use of hybrid meetings, even with the desire to come back to travel. And you should focus your models here on how you can best integrate those different models into your program, particularly at the point of booking and particularly at the point of payment and resource. Dynamic pricing models will be here to stay for the foreseeable future, at least. My colleague Jo, very strong feelings around this. You ever get her quietly in the corner on the Zoom call, she'll talk you through some of this, but the dynamic pricing and dynamic sourcing approaches are definitely with us for at least 2 to 3 years. It's going to be very difficult to predictively contract or drive volume-based commitments in a fluctuating model, and therefore we need to be flexible with each other around how we manage inventory and yield. Customer success management or account management in old speak is going to look very different in this environment as well. Relationship-based lunch buying, drinks buying type relationships are not the way forward anymore. Results-based delivery is where this is at, and how we manage relationships with each other and what we think is important in an account management relationship are also moving forward. And it's important now that you have those conversations now together. What represents value? What represents success? And how do we measure performance in a variable demand-based service model? In general, you need to be more agile, adopt an agile mindset. As an early 50s gent, I don't always find this the most easy thing to do, but I try to implement some agile solutions and agile approaches as often as I can, particularly in strategy, particularly in process assessment and assignment, and particularly in thinking about commercial models and opportunity. An agile mindset allows you to identify opportunity and focus resources specifically on that opportunity. You don't have to redesign the entire process to be effective. You need to focus on the areas of that process that need assistance and help, and focus resources in that way. Don't get trapped in rigid models. Don't ever get in a situation where your answer to a question is, well, we can't do that because that's not the way we work. That's a very dangerous statement to be in the current environment. Always try to think forwards, backwards, and then forwards again. If you want to set a goal in your programs, try and think of what that goal looks like in 3 years, and then imagine the key milestones back from that goal to the present day, and then think forwards in planning how you can arrive at that goal within the timeline that you want. Be flexible commercially. Don't have a single model. Deploy several different kinds of models so you can be flexible with your customer, or you can be flexible with your supply chain, and continuously monitor and engage at different points across processes and across your value chain. Allow for variability and create an agile mindset in your working team so that you can quickly move resource and team expertise from point of confluence to point of confluence to deliver a result. Traveller enablement, enable your travellers. There's been more and more and more to think about for travellers over the course of the last year, much of it based on, to a certain extent, speculation or what they do know or they don't know, because for many of them, they're not yet travelling. For a lot of them, the loss of their travel has been like a loss. You know, road warriors who are 100 days, 150 days a year on the road. This is a very different world now, working from home all the time. It is different. And we have to think a little bit more around the whole nature of the trip, safe space to safe space travel, all the different constituents that go into that. But there's a lot to think about for the travelers, and you need to focus in the next year on enabling them, give them the right platforms for communication, have clear processes and policies, make sure that certification, insurance and liability is clearly communicated, documented and enshrined in policy. Make sure that you have executive engagement to address traveller concerns. There are some very useful things coming in the marketplace around this. I think, again, I refer back to some of our peers at other firms, which will come out soon. But you really need to think about how you can enable your travellers in a new end-to-end environment that will come in the post-COVID state. So in summary, it's time to accelerate. Yes, it's still, we mustn't forget the difficult situation that we're in. We mustn't forget the things that we faced in the last year, but we also now need to look forward. We need to think about what we're going to do to enable that return to travel that we want, to enable that ramp up. We've got this opportunity now in the next year and a half, to really bring in these areas of focus, which for us are based around these 6 components, but will also include other areas for you. I'm going to leave you with one last thought, and it's a thought from my 5-year-old George a couple of weeks ago, who said to me, he said, "Daddy, the virus has torn us apart, but the vaccine will bring us together. And our good and diligent work together will do exactly what George has said. We must focus now on taking this opportunity and moving forwards towards the next steps."